What are some of the beliefs that you've heard along your way that like really like was astounding to you, that this is something that is really true to somebody that has survived trauma or experienced trauma?
So I'm thinking specifically of a young lady who survived sex trafficking, human trafficking. And she was, I think, 11 or 12 when she was kidnapped, essentially. And went into this world very young, right, of course. Her sense of self still very much developing. And then, when you get to your teen years, that's really when you're, stepping into an understanding.
Woman. Right.
And during this time of her life, she was being sold for sex. And so by the time she was 13 or 14 years old, it sort of became like, this is my life. This is it. Like, this is my life. This is who I am. This is all I'm good enough for. There was a period of time, according to her, when it was, even if I did get out of here, no one would love me. I'm damaged goods, so that became her story. So that when she did escape at 16 or 17 years old, that was all she knew, how to survive.
Yeah.
Just to use her body. And that was what she knew herself to be good for. So anybody showing interest, she assumed it was about sex, and that was like her only sort of tool in her toolbox.
Right.
And so because of that experience, and hers, years we're talking, years of her life, 6 or 7 years or something like that of her life, this was her identity. And when she came out, it was really hard for her to accept that it didn't have to be, that she could choose a different story, a different life, that she could heal, that was a part of what had happened to her, but it doesn't have to be who she is. That was a really hard concept for her to grasp, because if we're talking at the time that I saw her, I think she might have been 20 or 21. So 6 or 7 years of her life, we're talking about like a third of her life, was that, and so.
Like, what else is there?
What else is there? Who else am I? What do you mean there's more? What do you mean people care about me outside of this? I don't understand that. So that was heartbreaking, actually.
It's just horrific to even think of, like circumstances like that existing, like that humans would do that to other humans. But it's like, in that whole thing, like how was she able to heal from it? What kind of work did you do with her so that she can start having different beliefs? Yeah,
so good question. So the thing about healing is that it's an ongoing process. Right? Like, even if and when a person is able to change their minds, you're still living in the world, and there will still be triggers, and there will still be things that will cause you to flash back and remember, or sometimes even re-experience difficult things.
Right, of course.
So when you ask the question of how was she able to heal, I think what we were able to do in the time that I worked with her, which was really only about 6 months, is not a lot of time at all when you consider 6 years of her life was that. And all the stories that were developed, the beliefs that were developed as a result of that experience and that period of her life. But in the 6 months that we worked together, we of course went through the trauma narrative. I also taught her some rhythmic things because, again, since it lives in your body, it's important to work through the body, because just talking with trauma isn't going to be enough, because, again, the part of your brain where you process all that wasn't functioning. So there's going to be things that you won't be able to access unless you go into the body and do that work, that somatic work. So we did a little bit of that. And she was certainly able to externalize. She was able to get feel safe around men, which was not at all possible.
Really?
Not without her feeling like it was going to end in sex. Right?
Wow.
So she could be like at a restaurant. And if a guy sat at the table next to her, she would be thinking like, eventually he's going to take me and we're going to have sex.
Wow.
So she was able to get to a place where she would still be triggered.
Yeah.
But she understood the trigger and was able to have a different internal narrative.
Yeah.
That she could regulate herself.
Yeah.
And not have that hypervigilant kind of response where the heart rate is up and all those things. And that was sort of the most we were able to do. I haven't seen her in a while, so I can't follow up and say like where she is today.
Of course.
But that was, considering the amount of time, some really relevant work that we did, and that she was able to achieve a level of safety and comfort within her own body that had been stolen from her for years. Yeah.
That kind of like takes me back to like this idea of loyalty to your trauma. And I don't know if it's separate as far as like the beliefs that we tell ourselves or that was created, or if it's the fact that, you know, you feel guilty, kind of like survivor's remorse. Like you weren't supposed to make it or you weren't worthy, which is a part of the beliefs. But I want to hear or learn a little bit more about even that.
Yeah. So you mentioned a little bit of that survivor's remorse, which can be very common in like veterans. Yeah. Right. Who come back from war and their fellow soldiers like didn't make it. Yeah. Right. And they feel like it's not fair. Also people who just come from rough neighborhoods. Right. Whose friends didn't make it out, and maybe they did, and maybe they got to go to college or whatever else. And then they have the survivor's remorse. It can also be if the trauma happens at the hands of someone that you know and love and trust. Right. Which is often the case. Particularly if we're talking about like people who are sexually violated, it's often by someone they know. Yeah. And so there can be this sense of like loyalty to that person despite what they've done to you, because there may be a family member, right? Right. And so there's that confusion. Yeah. And also those types of violations, sexual violations, often come with a lot of psychological manipulation first. Of course. Where they tell you that it's love and I really care about you and don't tell anyone, this is our little secret. So it can get a little bit warped. Where they want to kind of like involve you in the process so you feel guilty. Yeah. That it's like, well, it was my fault. I went with it. Yeah. Or you think, no, we're really in love. This is really a relationship. This person really cares about me. And it's like, no, they're taking advantage of you and using you, making sure that you won't tell on them. And so, but you're convinced that you're really in love with this person and that they're in love with you and that maybe you're going to run away one day, and everybody else just doesn't understand that this is true love or whatever. So there's that. And there's also sometimes, like the woman I just spoke to you about, where she came to know herself in the context of that trauma. So the experience became a part of her identity because that's how she knew herself. Yeah. And so part of the work we did was disassociating from this idea that changing her mind was a betrayal, like a self-betrayal. Wow. Right, because this is who I am. And I came to develop this narrative that I'm strong because I can choose to engage sexually, right, and do this thing, and it becomes like this kind of like warped, empowered feeling. Yeah. Because this is what our minds are capable of when we're in survival mode, and we have to again tell these stories just to make it through. You know, just to make it through the next day or the next round of men or whatever her circumstances were. She came to develop this story that it was like she was empowered, and look how these men would, you know, fall to their knees for her, and they want her, and she was this and that. And so that became like this story about she was like this like sex warrior, right? Wow. Kind of a thing. Yeah. And so like to change that was like betraying in her mind this caricature that she had created about who she is. Right. And so realizing like you can still have an empowered narrative that doesn't have to be attached to this trauma. Right. And so in that way, people can be loyal to it as well because they don't know themselves in any other context. Right. I don't know myself outside of being the violent person or the victim or the da-da-da. So this or the person that came from a rough neighborhood and never made it out, or so like I play it out, and this is like who I am. Yeah. And so, I have to stay loyal to this story, because if I change this, what else has to change? It's like domino effect, right?
That is
like everything has to change. And if I'm not this person in the world, then what does that mean about how I've defined the world and other people in it? And everything has to change, and I have to dismantle all of that. And it's just easier for me to stick with what it's been, even if I know it doesn't serve me.